Welcome to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast, episode 58.
Welcome to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast with your host, Jack Mountain Bushcraft School founder and Master Maine Guide, Tim Smith.
I'm your host, Tim Smith. I'm a registered Master Maine Guide, and in 1999 I founded the Jack Mountain Bushcraft School. We help people become more skilled, more knowledgeable, more experienced, and more confident outdoors by using traditional skills, a few simple tools, and field-based experience. Whether you're looking to go from city slicker to competent outdoor professional, want to experience a remote expedition, or just want to learn a few new outdoor skills, we've got you covered. You can check out the show notes to this and all of our podcasts at blog.jackmtn.com. When you're there, click on the podcast button. And if you enjoy the show, please leave us a review on iTunes. Lastly, the best way to keep up with our programs and trips is to join our email newsletter, and you can do that at jmbnews.com. Hello and welcome back to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast. For episode 58, I am joined by Scott Oeth. Scott is a man of many talents. He is the owner of Bullamoose Patrol. He is a registered Maine guide. He is a regular speaker at Canoecopia. He runs is it a financial services business? Is that how would I be correct with that?
Yeah, that's it. I'm a financial advisor.
A financial advisor, a scout leader, father to 3 kids. So as you can probably tell, we're lucky to have Scott joining us because he doesn't have a whole lot of free time. He's a pretty busy guy. So thanks for being on the podcast today, Scott.
Hey, happy to be here. I'm hiding out in my basement, escaping the chaos and enjoying the last few hours of the weekend. So fun to catch up.
Yeah, for sure. I'm actually hiding out in the attic. So we are taking similar family men with similar approaches, I guess.
Yep. Got to take it where you can get it, right?
Right. Yeah. I remember, being a little kid and, seeing my dad sneak away from time to time for little bits of time and wondering what he was up to. And now I know, 100% exactly what he was up to. So just exactly. Trying to claw out a little bit of quiet time in a world full of chaos. So
yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your background. Tell for our listeners. You're the owner of a custom guide company. You have a full-time regular job, and I know a lot of the folks that listen to us think along the same lines, right? Like they love spending time out. They would love to move towards making that a profession and not just a hobby. And you've successfully pulled that off. So give us the 1 minute background talk.
Oof. Well, 1 minute. That's gonna be tough. Well, I grew up in an outdoorsy family. My dad loved the outdoors. My mom had grown up on a farm, so I heard a lot of stories and, hung around my uncles who were into hunting and trapping and things like that. And I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. In the house I grew up in, right out my back door was railroad tracks with a large wooded corridor. And I only had to walk through those woods really right out my back door. And I could jump a fence into a 5,000 acre forest. That's the University of Wisconsin's Arboretum. That was designed by Aldo Leopold when he was a professor of wildlife management and ecology there at the University of Wisconsin. So I'm sure you and probably a lot of listeners are familiar with Aldo Leopold. So that was my playground growing up, and he had worked to recreate the different biomes of Wisconsin in that one forest preserve. So we had pine forest, we had hardwood forest, there was prairie and grassland, and I could hike 10 miles out my back door. Even though I grew up in sort of a suburban environment, this was it. This was my backyard. And so endless time tromping around building forts and along the train track corridor, hunting and things along those lines, and cross-country skiing back there, and a whole lot of time. But got involved in scouts. My dad had been an Eagle Scout and thought that was a great thing for him, and it ended up being a wonderful experience for me. We were a really strong troop when I was involved. I had some wonderful friends. It was the early 80s. It was not the cool thing to do at all. It was nerdy, sort of a covert thing that you did, but it was wonderful. And we camped every month of the year, cave camping, bike camping, whitewater rafting, canoe trips, backpacking. And as it got into the mid-teens, we did every summer a big high adventure trip, and we alternated between backpacking for a week out in the Rockies or canoe camping in the Boundary Waters in Quetico. So that was big passion of mine. I've always loved it. I got involved in sports, and that took up a lot of my time kind of in my late teens and 20s into my 30s, still did outdoor activities. But then as I more or less beat my body up and started losing my effectiveness as a volleyball player, I really dove back into the outdoors world and started doing more trips and just fueling that passion. And maybe kind of a key thing, Tim, you asked about sort of the balance between my financial advisor business, which I do love and I'm passionate and worked hard to build that, is about 12, 13 years ago, I left an employee role as a financial advisor and started my own practice and became self-employed and owned my own business there. And so while that had its own healthy helpings of blood, sweat, and tears, it also gave me a fair amount of flexibility schedule-wise and free time-wise. And it still does. I work hard at it, and I love it, but I can design my schedule and have a fair amount of flexibility there to run bull moose patrol and do those trips. So at this point, I'm still involved in Scouts. I've been an adult volunteer for the last 20 years, and I volunteer with the National High Adventure Base in the Boundary Waters and our local council here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And I've done a lot of things in terms of fundraising and Eagle Scout alumni and that type of thing. But my passion is still training leaders and getting them in the field for high adventure, particularly canoe camping and winter camping. And then Bull Moose Patrol started the business a number of years ago and took just a lot of things I've been doing for family, friends, Scouts, and decided to make a business around it, and had been doing a lot of pro level type training. Came out and did your course, Tim, and a number of other ones. And so run a lot of long weekend trips, and then usually a few longer expedition type trips each year. So.
Awesome.
And I guess maybe we have one other thing to throw in there is we do try and be pretty active on the digital side, and we've worked hard at the blog. I say my wife is involved. She's a great writer. That's her trade. And so we've worked to, on our blog, bullmoosepatrol.com, worked to try and write up a lot of great rivers and trails and places for wilderness experience within a few hours of where we live here. So we've tried to be a digital resource for places to go and also technique-wise how to do it.
Nice. And you guys are, I think I'm correct here, where you guys are based in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul? That's
right. Yep. Okay. We live in a northern suburb, work in the Twin Cities. So it's a good-sized metro area, but it's just, in my mind, it's got to be one of the best if you're an outdoor enthusiast. I guess there's a lot of good ones, but I really enjoy it here because I can get in the car and I only have to go about an hour north, and I'm really getting into that zone where it's coniferous forest and getting into boreal forest and Canadian shield country. If I go an hour southeast, I'm in the hardwoods and the driftless region where the glaciers never hit, huge rolling bluffs and different feel and look there. Or if I head out west just a little ways, I'm into grasslands and the edge of the prairie. So it's a neat area where you can experience different types of environments.
Yeah, you should forward this to the Chamber of Commerce because they'll probably get a whole bunch of people moving in.
I should.
You're painting a pretty good picture for I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that think that sounds super ideal. So anyway, so you did mention that, yes, you came out and did a Jack Mountain course in 2012. It was a canoe poling, our Riverman course, and we refer to that specific week as the Deluge Week. So for those of you out there in podcast land, that summer we were having a bit of a drought, and then we had this week scheduled to do a whole bunch of canoe poling, canoe paddling on all the awesome northern Maine rivers, and we got a day and a half into the week, and then the skies opened up and they didn't stop. So just as an example, I keep an eye on the level of the Aroostook River where the field school is based, and I think we were at about 200 cubic feet per second before the skies opened up, and at the end of like a day and a half of rain, it blew up to like 16,000 cubic feet per second. So that's orders of magnitude larger. The long version of the short story is that excuse me, all the rivers flooded like crazy, and it just wasn't safe for us to head out onto the river. So we had to amuse ourselves in other ways. I recall we did a bunch of crafting. We built some pack baskets. We went hiking in Baxter State Park. So, anything, as the sort of guide and or leader, I was looking for anything to keep everybody from basically from lynching me.
Yeah, you did a good job, Tim. You did a good job. And, we talked about this a little bit before, but I had that time slot booked. I was going to be doing a trip up in Northwest Ontario, and a couple people fell apart. The trip fell apart. I was looking for something else to do. You had done a great job early on. I'd been following you for a while online, your blog and your social media post. And so somehow it just kind of hit that you were running this course. And I was like, wow, I always kind of wanted to go to Maine. That sounds interesting. And I was really intrigued by the canoe polling thing. And we have a big canoe culture here in Minnesota. Some people would claim or argue it's the epicenter of canoeing. I'm not sure, but it is a big culture here. But no one polls, and I knew no one who did it. It seemed like it was almost sort of this mythical thing, or if anyone talked about it at all, they'd say, well, the rivers here are different than they are out in Maine, and they only have the rocky bottom. Anyway, we went out to your course, and we did get a lot of rain, but we did get that intro the first couple of days. We went up to Squapan Lake. You showed us the basics. We worked on walking back and forth. You talked a lot about technique. We had a nice paddle that day. We won the Aroostook River. That was good. And I really think a big part of being a guide is using good decision making and good judgment. And it sucked, but you made the call that the rivers were not safe for us to be on, and you did do a good job at tap dancing, come up with a plan B, and made crooked knives and pack baskets and cordage from fibers and all manner of bushcrafty type stuff, and spent some time in the shack reading your books and telling good stories. And I look back fondly at Baxter State Park. We had a great day hiking in the park at the end of the week too, I remember.
Yeah, that beautiful stream we walked up with I think the water temperatures maxed out at about 33 degrees Fahrenheit. As I remember jumping in and being, oh my God, this is cold. And it was, the heat of the summer. And it never gets any warmer. It's those classic mountain streams.
That shriek you let out. I mean, it was like a young girl who just, scalded herself. It was incredible.
I get that a lot. I didn't
know you could go that high. Yeah.
And that was you had the good fortune to spend that week with another one of our alumni who's now an international celebrity as in the persona of Sam Larson, who went on to win season 5 of Alone. And I know that you guys have kind of seen each other quite a bit in the last couple of years at various events. And I love to hear stories like that, guys who met on a course or a trip and then built a friendship afterwards. That's like, just kind of makes you feel a little warm inside, gives you the warm fuzzies.
Yeah, it was cool. I remember Sam was a nice guy when I met him out there at your camp in Maine, and we had a good time on the river and hanging out with him and eating ice cream and stuff like that. And then, ended up bumping into him years later at winter camping symposium here in Minnesota. And we picked right up where we left off. And I actually ended up sharing a tent this year at the symposium. And now he's, who knew the little puppy was then became this big international superstar. But we are talking about doing a trip together later this summer. And it was a great meeting.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's just great. It's a great story. Great how you guys are building a friendship around it. Nothing but great things to say about Sam. You always hear the stories about, so and so became a big star and changed and everything. And I don't know. I've kept in pretty regular contact with him, and it hasn't happened yet. He's definitely different than the kid he was then with 2 kids and running around chasing them. And I think that changes all of us when that happens.
But the interesting thing. So I don't watch a whole lot of the different reality survival shows and whatnot, but I watch a few. And when I heard Sam was on that first time, I was like, whoa, I got to see this. And I just thought it was interesting. They're showing people being dropped off in the first time he did it. And some of them are freaked out about bears, and you can tell they're really uncomfortable. And there's Sam howling back and forth with the wolves and grinning ear to ear. And you can just tell, like, he has really spent time in the woods. He's comfortable with it. I don't know how long he had, spent up there at Jack Mountain, but quite a while. And then even seeing the technique stuff coming through, raised bed with the fire underneath, some of the Morris Kohansky type techniques that I know, you've studied, and I've had some time with Morris, and he did really well. He's a really great guy. Could have been more happy for him to see him winning that.
Yeah. And I don't really watch any of the, we don't really have, we get TV through a Roku. Basically, we get like on-demand TV online. But I never get to use it because my kids are always using it. But so we just don't get any of the live shows, so I never see any of them. But
I was expecting, the fingers come out. We don't really have, air quote, TV.
It's my favorite. Hipsters will always be sure to tell you that I don't even own a TV, and they'll make sure that they weave that into the into the discussion about every 2 minutes, so that there's no question about who owns a TV and who doesn't, right? Like
we got it, Tim. We all got the virtue signal. We know you're yep.
But it's funny in this day and age because you don't need a TV, right? You can see it all on your phone or your whatever. So it doesn't.
That's right.
Owning a TV is so like 10 years ago, or not owning a TV. It doesn't really matter. But I guess my point is I don't really follow those things, but I did watch the first season of Alone. Essentially, I'm usually up at the field school for 6 or 7 months of the year. And then at the end of our season around Halloween, when I get home, that year, I was happy to watch, I think we binge watched the whole season of Alone, and just watching Sam go through his stuff. We did it all in a day, my wife and kids and I, and those shows are interesting to me when you know somebody on them. And when you don't, it's like anything else. Like, back 10 years ago, I knew a bunch of guys who played in the National Hockey League, and it was always fun to watch the games if you knew the guy. But, now I don't know who any of them are, so it's not that interesting to me. So it's probably the same with the reality TV stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was interesting seeing you in Norway, in your spot in the limelight there.
Yeah, that was super fun experience, right? Like really nice people, just well done, well put together, and I had a good time doing that because it wasn't there was none of the sort of fake drama of if we don't catch this squirrel we're all gonna die. They treated it like a game, and so it was fun to participate, and I had a really good time doing it. Nice guys, whatever. But
yeah. I thought it was great. I thought one of the, because I know you preach, if you're in a survival situation, the importance of, maintain core body temperature, stay hydrated, and then sleep. I know you're one of the few people that really emphasizes that, and seeing, with that continuous daylight up there being so far north, you struggling to get to sleep. And it looked like you're getting fairly, just kind of groggy and disoriented by the end, probably from lack of, hitting that REM and just amount of sleep that you needed.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, all those shows, they sort of have their story, and then they will edit the footage to fit the story that they're trying to tell. So I did sleep. I slept fine.
Did you?
Yeah,
okay.
I didn't get as much sleep as I wanted, but, it wasn't exactly as portrayed by the storyline.
Narrative being told. I see. Yeah.
But it is what it is. If you sign on the dotted line for that type of experience, that's what you're in for.
Right.
You don't get to kind of create all the storylines. There's lots of people that get paid a lot of money to do that, and you're just kind of there. When I was there, excuse me, the other guys on the show were like, "Oh, we're the dancing chickens," they heat up the floor and we dance around and they film it and then make the story out of whatever they want.
So that explains your makeup and wardrobe choices too?
Yeah, exactly. It was funny. They had me do a Facebook question and answer thing right after the show aired. And you get a lot of, there were like thousands of people asking questions and stuff. I had never done anything like that. So it was very interesting to me. And I remember one guy asked me what kind of pants I had for the show, and I was like, and I remember answering honestly, like, I don't know, but they're really old. They're really dirty and I still have them. So, but they weren't anything high speed or anything. We probably got them at the thrift store or whatever. So it didn't really matter. But it was interesting that those were the sorts of questions.
Yeah, your usual bushcraft skinny jeans, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. but just from the perspective of it, I think we spend a lot of time in this day and age talking about the things that don't matter, right? And then the very few things that really do matter and matter a lot kind of get glossed over and nobody cares. So in that situation, it like the pants I had on really didn't matter at all. It wasn't that cold. I mean, it was right around the solstice. So when we were up on the mountains, it was still, cold at night, but during the day it was 60 degrees or so, which, just because, as I know you do, and I also do extended winter trips. So, it's not really cold until it's really, below zero or whatever. And then you're like, okay, now it's a different experience. But if it's 50, 60 degrees during the day, you can stay dry and stuff. It doesn't matter what you have on. And this always leads me to believe, because in New England, we've got the White Mountains and the Appalachian Trail, and every summer there is always somebody that gets lost, and then they ultimately find their way out, and then the news media interviews them, and then the headline is always something to the effect of, man or woman lost in woods survives by, I don't know, rolling up in piles of dirt or something like that. And you're like, well, really they survived because it wasn't cold. And maybe they survived in spite of the stupid thing that they did that the media wants to harp on. So there was one last fall, I wrote a blog post about it. It was some kid or guy on like a raft somewhere in Southeast Asia, and I guess they go sit on these rafts and fish, and then every week or so someone comes out and they switch off or something like that. I don't know exactly how it works, but anyway, the rope to the anchor broke, so this thing just went adrift for like 15 days. But I remember the headline that the media jumped on, and I think it was Newsweek magazine, but, boy survives by drinking water, filtering seawater through his clothes or something. And, so supposedly, according to this, knucklehead writer who wrote the story, that if you're lost in that sort of situation, that if you suck seawater through your clothes, you're going to survive longer. So what it should have read was that this kid survived in spite of drinking seawater through his clothing. Because as we know, seawater does not filter salt from salt water. And if you drink salt water, you will die faster. You will not last longer. But because of sort of the people who write these stories, there's nobody fact checking the story or the headline. And the goal of the headline, I mean, it's a business. They're trying to get eyeballs on the article. I understand all that. That's not lost on me. But the downside is, I think if I had no background in survival or bushcraft or whatever, and I read that, then all of a sudden I've created this magical belief somewhere in the recesses of my mind. So if I'm ever stuck somewhere, I think I too will survive by drinking seawater, by filtering through my clothing. And just, the falsehoods and the myths are thus perpetuated. And it's annoying to me.
Yeah. I think there's many areas of life where you can see something that worked for one person, or something happened, but that doesn't mean you can extrapolate it backwards and mean that's a good path just because in that one case it happened to work out. So it's it definitely sounds like that's one of those.
Yeah, and just to bring it full circle, just, in New England, every summer somebody gets lost, and if you read the articles and took them at face value, they survived because they, I don't know, licked dew or, some other thing that's really kind of dumb. Then what we're left with, people like you and I who teach other people how to survive during adverse situations in the forest, is that you have to spend half the time kind of eliminating those false beliefs, when you could just jump into here's what you do. Then you get all the questions of, well, what about, on the whatever, Bear Grylls when he drank seawater or did this or did that, and you're sort of, you're almost like a myth busting, trying to get people to stop with the fantastic beliefs, and that takes up more time than maybe the actual course content, where you want to teach people what to do instead of what not to do. And just a pet peeve of mine, and I don't know why I don't know why I got
Yeah,
triggered there.
no. I think it's an important one. I think there's many areas where either people, I see what's coming to mind kind of related to that is people engage in some type of outdoor recreation where they've done it before. Maybe they've done it many times. You might say they're very experienced and they've done it a certain way and it's always worked out for them. But you throw one little wrench in that routine, a sprained ankle, food poisoning. I was leading a canoe trip this summer and I got terrible food poisoning. I ended up crawling around my hands and knees in the middle of the night a couple times, on a sandbar, just violently ill, or an injury, a gash, a twig in the eye, something like that. And how quickly someone who's maybe thinly prepared, lightly equipped, not experienced or skilled in doing anything other than that basic trip up and down the trail the way they've always done it before, it could really get them into trouble. And then, some of the ways things are taught, I think, get a little fantastic too, especially if you get into survival and primitive skills. There's a lot of, I think, primitive skills that are fun to learn, can be very rewarding to learn. They could be very additive or helpful in a emergency or survival situation. But the thing I always kind of think about is what really leads to, if you look at search and rescue statistics, you're talking about the lost hiker, it's people that are getting lost, they get injured, they're sick, they run out of time, it gets dark. And, some of these techniques require full capability. They require 2 hands, 2 eyes, maybe a high energy level. And that's why I'm often talking to people about, yes, let's learn these skills for fun because they are rewarding. They're a great way to have a deep outdoor experience without necessarily having to go far. But, when you're really talking about actual wilderness travel or tripping, I believe in, hey, let's stack the deck in your favor. I'm not saying bring mountains of gear along, but let's make sure that you're properly equipped. And if something does go wrong, you've built in a margin of safety for yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I know you and I have talked in the past, and to me, being out on a remote expedition for a week and a 2-week expedition is a whole different animal than a weekend trip.
Completely.
But for me, being out a multi-week trip, and especially in the winter, that's where all the kind of fake stuff, all the things that don't really work, it all falls away there. And that's one of the beauties of being out and doing those longer term, arduous trips is that, when someone has had that experience, a lot of the sort of things that pass as survival skills or whatever, say on YouTube or, in a short 1-day workshop, a lot of the kind of the BS that is perpetuated there just falls away. So the good test for a lot of the sort of things that pass for survival skills is, will they cut the mustard on, for example, a 2-week cold weather trip? And if they'll work there, they'll work anywhere. But like you say, if you and I are out and we have a group of people and somebody busts through the ice, we're out on a frozen lake, they get soaked up to their neck, it's 20 below and the wind's blowing real good. That is not the time for you, me, or anybody else to prance through the forest looking for good friction firewood, right? If you have it, that's the time to flip over a 55-gallon drum of diesel fuel and light it on fire. And to stop that person from dying. And I think that to
get the road flare out of your bag and
exactly, like the purest of the primitive skill stuff. And I'm a lifelong practitioner and proponent of those techniques, and I think they're awesome and they add a lot to the experience. But there's certain things that are appropriate for survival, and then certain things that maybe are more of a primitive living. And I think that line is often pretty blurry to a lot of people. And I think that when you experience, a long, hard expedition, that line is no longer blurry. You'll take exactly what you need and maybe nothing you don't.
I think that's dead on. I think that's so accurate. And that's always been one of the things I've liked about what you're doing. Part of the reason I went out and took a course with you, and I like following what you're up to with Jack Mountain, is you're teaching the skills, you're teaching the great traditional skills. You've got the style points there, but also just what's really worked and is effective, and it's a wonderful way to travel. But then you take people on trips on expeditions. And that absolutely is where the rubber meets the road. Anyone can bumble by on a weekend or in the woods, whatever, out behind their house or something like that, a mile from the car. But when you're having to travel and cover ground on a time schedule, it's a completely different deal. And a lot of it is done before you even leave. The planning and preparation of the food, the thinking about the timing of the travel, the decision making, how you manage the pace of the group. Maybe you have someone that's not quite up, in terms of being able to push as hard as other folks, and managing that expedition behavior and the nerves. And that's part of it too, or being a good group leader. And a lot of those things are very different than just endlessly practicing primitive skills out back. So I love that stuff. I'm always trying to get better at it. I find it very rewarding and fun, but I always come from, I guess I got my start as a wilderness tripper, backpacking, canoe camping, those types of things. So that's the paradigm I'm always seeing it through. And I see some folks doing things. I just think, just right away, it jumps out at me. Well, that's not going to work on a long trip. Like here in Minnesota, there's a lot of, not a lot at all, but there's a small hardcore group of people that have done Arctic canoe trips for the last 30, 40 years. And some of those guys are my mentors and the people I really try and study and learn from. And you know what you never hear them talking about? What knife they carry, that doesn't even come up. They talk about things like, what rain gear they have, what food, navigation, what maps they use, how they get information about rivers and water levels. Those are the things that they talk about obsessively. No one's talking about what full tang knife or what the steel is in their knife or what grind they have on the knife. It's almost irrelevant, and these are guys that are doing 3-month-long trips, above the Arctic Circle, paddling through herds of caribou and muskox. So it is interesting, I think, that kind of filter of what really works on an expedition or a long trip.
Yeah, for sure. I am in wholehearted agreement. And I think the lesson, if you're out there listening in podcast land, is that no one cares about your knife. No one cares, right? And it's funny. I think it was.
Can I share a secret, Tim, just between you and I?
Yeah.
Now that I've said that, I really like knives, but I try not to. I try and quash that lust down and keep it simple. So
I like them as well, but I just think the point is that their utility is maybe, if that's your only tool, great. But we had a couple of super experienced guys that I know I don't need to name them, but at the end of a 2-week snowshoe trip, we were talking about, during a debrief, we sort of like, okay, so what was the tool you used the most? And, winter tripping, hot tent camping, you're using an axe and a saw a lot, and you could just get by with just a saw, but we usually fell with an axe and then we'll section everything with a saw. So we were talking about, I use this tool every day, blah, blah, blah. And then we talked about knives at the end of it. And, people come to the realization that I used a knife to like spread peanut butter or to, cut bread or cut some food or something. But the sort of, we're not trying to be John Rambo out in the woods. Like you're not tying your knife to a stick and killing wild pigs and like, wrestling dragons and killing zombies with it. And so, it was, those sorts of things are a great offshoot of spending a lot of time out on a trip is just, because then you don't have to say some guy loves his knife and say he bought a $600 custom knife or, spent 5 years learning the art of forging blades and made one. And then you don't want to be like, hey, that's cool, but it doesn't really matter. But it's awesome as a guide or as an instructor when you sort of set up a situation where they can arrive at that destination on their own where you don't have to say anything. And I think then the lessons are learned. But if somebody's in love with their knife and you're like, oh, that's cool, but you're not going to use it much, it's kind of a dead weight, then they're going to be angry with you and you're the bad guy for this or that. But when they can arrive at those aha moments on their own, it's a much better learning outcome, I think, for the person.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, hey, there's a lot of things folks like to collect or they're just fun to have. And if you can afford it, I completely agree with that. I think don't let that lack of some high-end custom knife or whatever object it is hold you back from feeling like the experience is out there, and it's absolutely skills above gear. And I try to think about, as I work on controlling, little desires that come up in terms of gear, I'd rather try to own or acquire a skill or a bit of knowledge. And sometimes I try and trick myself, or I talk to people about things about that, understanding some other plant or tree and knowing more about that, its uses and how that could come into play, or going from the J stroke to Canadian or North Wood stroke, think of the lifetime of pleasure that can come from owning and acquiring that skill, as opposed to, the constant obsession of the next piece of gear.
Yeah. And I think we live in a capitalistic society, and there's always going to be new pieces of gear, but it's always good to remember that for 99% of human history, they didn't have metal knives. They didn't have anything like that. So,
right.
So for us to think that we need it in order to be out on the land is a bit of a stretch, maybe promulgated by modern marketers or something.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome that we're of the same idea there. And I think, like you say, when you talk to people who have spent a lot of time on the trail, they often have very similar kind of approaches to that idea of skill versus gear, just because I don't know if you eventually will result at that viewpoint as a result of experience, because I'm sure we could find people that disagreed. But it seems like a lot of people, and I don't want to say most, but a lot of people come to that kind of mindset after a lot of time out.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which is good.
Yep. Yeah.
So just want to switch gears a little bit here. I know that you are among your many talents, you are a registered Maine guide living in Minnesota, which is pretty cool. And one of the things that you do as a Maine guide is that you speak at Canoecopia every year.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about that. I spoke there, just a little bit of background. I spoke there 2 years, I think 2004, 2005, had a great time. But tell me a little bit about the event, or at least tell the folks out there in podcast land a little bit about the event and kind of the topics that you talk on there.
Yeah, so there's a company called Rutabaga out of Madison, Wisconsin, and they run Canoecopia, and it's an event that's been going on for a long time. I started going when I was a little kid. My dad and I have a birthday a day apart in the middle of March, and it was always over our birthday weekend, and we went back when it was a smaller show, but it's they put it on. There's a lot of manufacturers there. There's tons of gear for sale. There's great deals to be had. If you're looking for new canoes or paddles or camping gear, that's part of it. But the big deal in my mind is the knowledge sharing. They've got, I don't even know, dozens, maybe 100 plus speakers. It's probably on the website giving talks. So from Friday night through Sunday afternoon, every hour, you've got your choice of multiple different presentations going on, a lot of trip reports, a lot of people talking about paddling, and a wide range of stuff, from canoe tripping in the north and the Arctic to Ozarks to Florida to, sea kayaking. There's a lot of stand-up paddle boarding. So there's a lot of that, but whatever you're looking for in terms of the wilderness or paddling world, you'll probably be happy that you went. And so I went when I was a kid, and that really helped fuel my interest and desire in a lot of this, and got me dreaming of the north and paddling in piney lands and seeing moose and catching huge fish and seeing the northern lights and all that. And so it was a lot of fun for me for a couple of years ago to come back as a speaker. And since I have done a lot of trips in Maine, and that's your area out there, even though I view Maine as really a sister state to Minnesota, there's so much similar, but enough different that I really think it makes the trip either way worthwhile. But not a lot of people in this area are familiar with Maine, but I think Minnesota, I'll just state my biases here, probably better lake country paddling, the boundary waters in Quetico. But in Maine, the nice thing, and why I think it makes a great next step for that boundary waters paddler, is the long rivers that you have. You have fewer people. I think we have a population of about 4.5 million. You're a little over 1 million. You've got more elevation. You've got Mount Katahdin running down to sea level, very wet environment with the Maritimes. And you got some long rivers that don't necessarily require a lot of portages. You've got some nice white water. So the rivers in Maine, to be able to go and do a week-long or a 5-day long trip is just fantastic. You got a lot of moose. Unfortunately, our moose herd in northern Minnesota's suffered, and there's a lot fewer, but we did the Allagash a year ago. We saw 8 moose in the fall, and that's fantastic. I'm sure you've done trips, you've seen a lot more. So anyway, yeah, Canoecopia, I'll be talking about paddling Maine's wild rivers, which is one of the presentations I've done a couple times, and I'm talking about canoe polling. It's kind of one of my little personal missions through Bull Moose Patrol, and is to work on reintroducing canoe polling to the upper Midwest. It was here. There was a group out of Missouri where it was really big in the late 70s. That seems to have died out. And, if you look at our logging history, it's the same as northern Maine. In fact, a lot of the lumberjacks moved from Maine to New York to Michigan to Wisconsin to Minnesota.
Yeah, and they just kept moving west. They just
kept moving.
History.
They just kept moving west. And like I say, I think I mentioned earlier, when I was interested in polling, the story I kind of hear is, well, our rivers are a little different. Well, guess what? If I look at old photos of lumberjacks on the Flambeau or Chippewa River in northern Wisconsin, they're standing on logs with pike poles. And then I see, here's photos of them in canoes, with fishermen, holding them in an eddy while they're trying to catch that big muskie. And same thing in Minnesota. So I've found there's some fantastic rivers in our driftless country down in the southeast part of the state. You have Rocky Bottom, Bluff Country rivers that are just awesome for polling, and some really great ones northwest Wisconsin, Minnesota as well. So I'm going to be talking about polling, and there's another great outdoor show similar here in the Twin Cities, outdoor shop called Midwest Mountaineering, runs an outdoor expo every spring and fall. It's a little bit more broad based. It covers a lot of different outdoor recreation, and I'm the one guy that's out of all the dozens of speakers has a fairly strong traditionalist bent. So you got people talking about cool stuff like fat biking and stand-up paddleboarding, and then I'm doing a demo on axe saw on knife use and stuff like that and wilderness survival. But same thing, talking about canoe polling, and I talk a lot about winter camping and wilderness survival and things like that at those talks,
That's
at
awesome.
those events.
Yeah, I always enjoy, especially when most of the crowd is more modern and mountaineering based. They always look at me like I have 3 heads if you mention an axe or a saw or traditional tool, and so it's good.
I think there's a lot of them that they're curious, though, is what I found, and we have it's some people will right off the bat think you're a horrible person if you even mention an axe, but then there's a lot of others who will listen, and I view it, I think, where I could see the discussion going is, you look at something like hunting and fishing, it's a consumptive activity, but we've decided most states have sort of a protocol, there's rules or regulations around how we can do this and not damage the population. In fact, it can be beneficial. I don't know if we need to get into a lot of rules and regulations with something like an axe, but I think that same mindset that this is actually in many ways, in many environments. I mean, where you are cutting down some dead wood and having your fire to cook over it has to be better ecologically than burning through a bunch of camp stove gas, right?
Yeah, a previous podcast and definitely blog posts that we've had in the past, we try to make the difference between what am I looking for? Minimum impact versus displaced impact.
Oh, yeah.
So,
right.
Minimum impact being having less of a footprint on the planet versus displaced impact. And I would say that camp stoves are usually displaced impact, that there's a big impact, but it's not felt where the people are doing the recreating.
Yep.
But I think there's appropriate skills and techniques for each biome. And where we're at in northern Maine, there's just about unlimited dead standing timber to make small cooking fires and stuff. So it's appropriate there. Places don't see a lot of people. They don't see a lot of use. But for example, in like a high alpine with short, really old trees, that's not an appropriate place to cook over a fire. So, I think that using your head and making sure that what you're doing is appropriate to where you're recreating is important. I was just going to make the point where you said that, people would judge you and think you were a bad person right when you started talking about an axe, that I don't have that problem because people will believe that I'm a bad person before I say anything at all, and they're usually right. 99% of the time or so. So,
yeah, funny stuff.
So, cool. Yeah. So I'll put in a plug that I thoroughly enjoyed Canoecopia when I was there. So if you're within, I don't know, 15 hours or so of Madison, Wisconsin, it's in early to mid March. You can look them up on the website and we'll put it in the show notes, a link to it. But you should definitely attend if you've never been. Like Scott says, any imaginable piece of gear you can see and pick up and hold in your hand and talk to the manufacturers, as well as get great deals, as well as be able to take in an absolute wealth of knowledge on a variety of topics, starting with Scott, regarding canoeing, camping, and adventure travel. So put it on your list if you'd never been. It's worth the trip.
It's a good time.
So couple of last quick questions. Your favorite winter trip? So Upper Midwest, where should people consider going if they're doing a hot tent snowshoe toboggan trip?
Well, I think the easy answer, the sort of the pinnacle experience in this area has to be the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, just because of the size of it. And, even the difference of going from Minneapolis up to Ely or Grand Marais, where you enter the Boundary Waters, it's significantly colder, significantly further north, and you get really into the Canadian Shield country. So, like I said, it's kind of the easy answer, but it's a huge area, and the experience there in the winter is phenomenal. I mean, first of all, it's usually serious cold. I've led trips through the cold weather leader school for the Boy Scouts for the last several Januaries, and 30 below is not uncommon. So it's not a place for beginners unless you are going with a guide or someone who really knows what they're doing. But, the opportunity for northern lights, to hear the ice booming under your head or the trees popping with the cold, to just see the incredible frozen beauty of the Boundary Waters. We have quite a healthy wolf population here, Tim, which I don't believe you have in Maine, but
nope.
Chance to hear wolves
officially we don't have any south of the St. Lawrence, but all the biologists are claiming now that there's it's like a new subspecies of a hybrid wolf, coyote, and dog, and that's what we have.
Coy wolf, yeah. Well, I mean, when you hear them howling across a frozen lake, and it's a really neat experience. So, yeah, many entry points. In the winter, I usually go in Ely and off of Moose Lake, which is a little east of Ely, but there's a lot of great entry points. So that's probably my favorite for winter camping.
Okay. So related question, Upper Midwest, and I'm guessing the answer might be the same, but where would you advise people to go canoeing?
Well, of course, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness there again is great. But what I've been doing a lot with our trips is we have fantastic rivers that, I mean, honestly, just almost no one's on, because folks are so hardwired if they're doing any paddling. First of all, maybe it's just kind of an afternoon of paddling around, at their cabin while they're at the lake, which is wonderful. Or you have people where it's just the tradition. They go to the Boundary Waters. They've been doing that with their parents or their uncle or their scout group or whatever for years and years. And it's wonderful. I could happily spend the rest of my life paddling around the Boundary Waters in the Canoecopia. But we've got great rivers in Minnesota. In the Northeast, we've got some wonderful coniferous forest type rivers, a lot like you have in Maine. In the Southeast, we've got the driftless region, and so those two different areas have a very different feel, and they're great. And then there's this thing, the state line. We have this friendly animosity. But since I grew up in Wisconsin, I live in Minnesota now, it doesn't really apply to me. I can go across the state line. It doesn't bother me. But there's some great long rivers all through northern Wisconsin, too. The Flambeau River is one of my favorite. Not many people on it, but you can do a 100-mile trip. It goes through a monstrous reservoir area with hundreds of islands that you can camp on. Feels a lot like the Boundary Waters. And then there's sets of rapids throughout. Great history on that river. Same thing with the Chippewa, with the Namakogan and St. Croix, which are actually a national wild and scenic riverway. So those are my favorites for longer trips. I guess I'm cheating here. I'm just throwing out a whole bunch of stuff. But for a day trip for people in the Twin Cities or a weekend, man, the Bluff Country rivers are just awesome. They're a lot of fun for a weekend. The Cannon River, the Root, the Black River in Wisconsin. You've got high towering limestone and sandstone bluffs, bald eagles swirling around, fast, rocky little rivers, and they're just beautiful.
Yeah, you're making me want to travel west. As a native New Englander, we're not that well versed on geography, so I know there's Maine and then New Hampshire and Vermont, and then I think there's New York is next, and then I think there's a couple of states in between, and then we end up in California. So you guys are one of those in between states that I want to get out and see more of.
Yeah, well, come on out anytime. We'd love to have you.
Right on. Anything else you want to share with our listeners? And again, we'll link in Bull Moose Patrol. We'll link in Canoecopia, the Midwest Mountaineering Adventure Expo. But any other kind of points that you would like to make sure that people know?
Well, no, this has been great talking with you. I mean, there's a lot to share. I guess what I'd say is in terms of like a presence, where to find out about what we're doing with Bull Moose Patrol. Facebook is really our most active channel. I'm usually posting and sharing stuff on there. And but we do have the website, bullmoosepatrol.com. I'd love to have people sign up as a email subscriber. And maybe the one thing I'll say is, and this may change going forward, but until this point, most of the trips that we've run have been sort of invite only. I have a pretty large pool of people I've done trips with in the past, people that I know. We've kept it a somewhat tight group, and that's kept me about as busy as I want to be with this. I post, here's the trip schedule for this year, and things fill up. We are looking at getting to more of post things on the site, and people sign up and have standing courses on wilderness survival, winter camping school, canoe tripping school. And but if you're interested in any of this and you live anywhere in the Midwest, I'd say, pop us an email at bullmoosepatrol@gmail.com and express your interest, and love to talk it over and see if we can get hooked up for a trip or class.
That's awesome. And I will, can you get to your Facebook and everything from your website?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, you can. If you go to bullmoosepatrol.com, there's the links there for Facebook, which is just Bull Moose Patrol, and emails there. So
perfect. So I'll link that up in the show notes. Well, Scott, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today, and we'll both have to leave our respective man cave zones here and go back and interact with family members in a minute. But I just wanted to say thanks again for taking the time and wish you much success in 2019.
Yeah, this was great, Tim. I really enjoyed catching up and appreciate the opportunity. And same to you. I'm looking forward to following along from afar at the wonderful trips and photos and info that you're always sharing. And hope we can catch up in person before too long.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thank you for those of you out there in podcast land. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this show and think it's valuable, please share it with somebody. Leave us a review, leave us a star rating. You kind of know the drill at this point. We ask for it every time. But thanks for spending the hour with us, and we'll hit you back later. You have been listening to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast. For more information on our professional wilderness guide training programs that are college accredited and GI Bill approved, visit us on the web at jackmtn.com.